Hello and welcome to this podcast from the UK's Federation of Small Businesses, FSB. I'm Alan Sodhi. And our guest today is a senior fellow at the Harvard Business School and a leading authority on US competitiveness, entrepreneurship and innovation. She was a member of President Barack Obama's cabinet, serving as the administrator of the US Small Business Administration from 2009 to 2013. And the SBA is an arm of the US government that provides support for the US's SMEs through measures like financial support and business guidance. Her perspective as an expert on the economic health and well-being of the US's small businesses is the focus of her influential book, which is here with you today, Karen, Fintech, Small Business and the American Dream. And the second edition of that you could see there if you're watching this, but if you're not, is in Karen's hand now. That's just been published. And the book offers groundbreaking analysis and insight from those dark days following the 2008-9 recession and then continuing all the way through many years ahead to then the COVID-19 pandemic and charting how fintech has changed and will continue to change small business lending. So, Karen Mills, thank you very much indeed for joining us and welcome to FSB.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. And FSB is always an important stop when I come here to the UK because you represent all of the UK's small businesses so well and so deeply. So I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you. And it is delightful to have you. And I just wonder, from your book, I mentioned it charts the last 15 to 20 years, really. And I'm just wondering how you think the small business landscape has changed over that time in the US, but also do you see any parallels with the UK, or do you think the small business sector in each country is quite different?
The US and the UK small business sectors are actually very parallel. And in the US, half the people who own or work for a small business. So that's half the jobs. In the UK and also in the EU, it's even more. So when you think about policy that affects small business and their importance to the economy, it's really critical to get it right for small businesses. But the problem is it's complicated because all small businesses are different, as you know very well. And in the U.S., if you look at 33 million small businesses, 27 million are sole proprietorships. And these are similar in the UK. This is a growing segment. We are seeing the gig economy really flourish, and we have to think, how do we help the sole proprietor? And then you look at the next biggest category, which is Main Street small businesses. And in the UK, of course, it's High Street. But the cafes and the dry cleaners, they are very important, but they tend to be local. Another category are the supply chain businesses. And in fact, I am spending time with the UK Digital Catapult with a colleague of mine, economist Mercedes Delgado. We have categorized the UK small businesses in the same way we did the US small businesses, and we find so much innovation coming from small supply chain services businesses. They really are a huge source for the digital economy and now the new AI economy, and they're going to drive a lot of growth and productivity. So each of these needs a different kind of policy, and each of these needs a different kind of help that is right for them.
And that's really interesting that you're doing that work, because during the pandemic, during the two years of the pandemic in the UK, we lost about 500,000 small businesses. It went from 6 million to 5.5. And in order to get growth going, I think in the UK's economy, we need to bring those back. So would you see that supply side, supply chain sector as potentially key to that?
All of the small business sectors really suffered in the pandemic, but the ones that suffered the most were really the customer-facing ones. In the U.S., we have had really robust programs that intervene quickly, and I think this contributed to our V-shaped recovery, and we didn't have as much loss of small businesses because when you lose them, they're very hard to get back. So I think a focus both on the high street small business and in the supply chain. The benefit of the supply chain ones is they drive a lot of innovation, and that leads to more productivity and really is a great employment driver.
Now, your book explores how technology is transforming the lending market for small businesses. I wonder if you can explain a little bit more about that.
One of the things that we know is that capital is critical to small businesses, but the process of getting capital is just filled with frictions. You know, you Xerox a bunch of tax returns and you take them down the street to the bank, and the bank looks at them for 3 weeks or 3 months, and then they say yes or they say no, and you go to the next bank. That has been the traditional lending process for decades, maybe centuries. What we have now is digitization and transformation by technology of this process. We call the sector Fintech, and it is exploding over the past 10 years, but particularly ready to accelerate now. So the book is about how Fintech can take data through data pipes, APIs, put them into some kind of artificial intelligence algorithm, and tell a lender who's creditworthy and who's not. But the best part is that the small business owner can also know about their cash flows. They can see insights into their own business maybe they never saw before. And this has the power to perhaps avoid life-threatening cash crunches. In the book, we describe something called small business utopia. And that's a small business owner able to look at a dashboard that says to him, in 3 weeks, you're going to need $7,000 to buy new inventory. And don't worry, we know you can pay that back after the holiday season. And here is a button where you are pre-approved. So press here, and the money can be in your account today or tomorrow. That would be transformational.
It would, and of course, access to finance is absolutely crucial, isn't it, to get that growth. And that actually brings me on to asking you a bit about when you were part of President Obama's administration, because you were part of his cabinet leading the Small Business Administration. What were your goals and kind of what was the biggest thing that you achieved in that? But I'm imagining that given that you started in 2009, we're talking here at the height of what in the UK at least was known as the credit crunch. I don't know if that term was the same in the US, but certainly where the lending market had really tightened following the financial crisis. So presumably, like in the UK, a lot of US small businesses struggling to get access to finance. I'm guessing that was probably a big part of what you faced when you took on the job.
I had an absolutely terrific job for 5 years, working for President Barack Obama, being part of his cabinet as the person responsible for all of America's small business and entrepreneurs. But there was only one difficult thing, and that was the timing. I started in the first quarter of 2009, which was the credit crisis, and credit was absolutely frozen. The banks had gotten overextended with bad mortgages, and they just reacted by pulling the plug on small business lines of credit. Small businesses were just in a terrible position. I was able to persuade President Obama and Larry Summers, who was then the head of the National Economic Council, to do something really bold. Now, I had come into this position as a venture capitalist, so I was used to, taking action to solve the problem. And this was a crisis, so I felt we needed to be bold. We raised the guarantee rate on SBA loans to 90%. And reduced and eliminated all of the fees. This was transformational. Now, the SBA has a portfolio of $100 billion of loan guarantees. And we were able to take a situation where nobody was making any more loans, even SBA loans, and get 1,000 banks back to SBA lending in 6 months. I think this taught me a number of things, but one was how important the flow of credit is to small businesses, because without it, they just can't survive. There's not enough cash buffer. So keeping this credit flowing was really critical during that credit crisis.
You're listening to a podcast from FSB, the Federation of Small Businesses in the UK, and we're with the leading US small business expert and former member of Cabinet with the President Obama administration, Karen Mills. Karen, we were talking before about when you were in the Obama administration, you started at a very difficult time for small businesses in the US and indeed the economy around the world during the credit crunch, the financial crash and the aftermath of that. But in your book, you also look at how small businesses were impacted when it came to the pandemic, when it came to COVID-19. Now, here in the UK, clearly there was a massive impact. Some businesses were forcibly closed. There was consequential knock-on effects for supply chains. That at first, certainly, there was a great deal of uncertainty where many small businesses were seeing their income dry up overnight. And at the Federation of Small Businesses, we absolutely went into overdrive. It was never more important, in our 50-year history, really, to give a voice to our members, but not just that, to actually campaign extremely effectively and extremely rapidly to get support in there for them to help get as many through the crisis as possible. We managed to get a lot of support. There were some groups that were still left out or still excluded from that, but there was support for many. What was the impact in the US, and was there an attempt to get that equivalent kind of support to prop up small businesses? Because presumably there, like here, it would have been, terrifying if you're a small business owner and suddenly your income dries up.
I think we forget how absolutely frightening the first few months of COVID were. And not only was it frightening for health and wellness, when we had to shut down the economy for health and safety reasons, small business owners saw their entire livelihood potentially about to go up in smoke. Because in the U.S., a small business has, on average, 27 days of cash. And if you're a restaurant, it's 19 days of cash. And we were clearly looking at a shutdown for at least that amount of time, if not longer, in the most optimistic views in March, April of 2020. So what did the American government do? And at that point, I was very involved in trying to advocate, as you were, for massive action. The government came out with a program called PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, and the first amount of it was over $350 billion. It was gone in 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
And businesses were panicked that they weren't going to be able to get some help. And the biggest businesses had been served first at the front of the line by the biggest banks. So this really wasn't a good outcome. Fortunately, the government responded with a second tranche and then a third, and we were able to get new fintechs involved in distributing the money. In the book, one of the reasons I wrote a second edition of this book was to tell the full story of the pandemic aid. A lot has been said later about fraud and did we waste the money. And we spent over a year going back on every detail of these programs in the U.S. The answer is that the programs on every study and every economist look are viewed as successful. The fraud rate is under 10%, maybe under 5%. Now, that's still a lot of money when you're talking about hundreds of billions. But most of the money went into the hands of small businesses without which, they would have been shut down. And as a result, we had what we see as a V-shaped recovery, as opposed to the very long and painful U-shaped recovery that we had from the 2009 financial crisis. So I would contend that doing things rapidly
That was the thing, is it has to be done so
had
quickly.
to be done
didn't it?
quickly, without a ton of paperwork, which it would have been better for fraud if you had more checks. To make sure it got out through these new fintechs, not just our banks, but digitally, and make sure it reached everybody, including the sole proprietorships of the very smallest businesses. Those were keys to success, and I hope we don't have any more pandemics and small business crises.
Definitely not,
I thought the first one was the worst we'd see, but then, of course, COVID was even worse. It made the 2009 crisis look like a small blip in the graph. But if we do face these issues again, I think we have some important lessons to learn, which is early and large help to this sector will repay you in terms of a better recovery and more spending and growth from this sector as you try to emerge from the crisis.
I wonder if we can just turn briefly to thinking a bit about international trade. FSB's own research shows that the US is seen as one of the most important export markets for UK small businesses, and also many importers here see the good opportunities in stronger trade links with the US. What are some of the policies or ideas that you think could open up more UK SME exports to the USA, but also US small businesses exporting to the UK?
Exports are a very underdeveloped opportunity for small businesses, and we did a lot at the SBA when I was in the administration to help small businesses export. We would love to see more small businesses export terrific goods from the UK to the US, and small businesses in the US to have more export opportunities. What it takes is a lot of hands-on activity. You can create some policies that help, which are duty credits and tariff removals and exemptions. But the real help to small business owners is connecting them to the markets. I am an old-fashioned fan of trade missions. I think if you can get people in the right sectors together, digitally or in person, you have the opportunity to create the relationship that create supply chain connections or just consumer export opportunities. So those would be the sorts of things that I think I would put money against in a policy format.
Because I think you're right. I think it's still, even now, and how we can communicate with each other in so many different ways, but that kind of in-person networking, even if it's virtual, but just having those kind of one-to-one conversations and actually connecting with people can make all the difference in terms of beginning to build that business relationship. Something else that I think you've written about in the past has been the link between entrepreneurship and aspirational life goals for young people. And I'm just wondering, this is something that we look at here at the Federation of Small Businesses and are doing some research on, including with some younger people who maybe are still at university or still at school, but who haven't maybe decided on their career path. But we're very keen that in schools and universities in the UK, entrepreneurship, setting up your own business is promoted as a very potentially good career option. And I just wonder what your pitch would be to someone thinking of maybe going down the road of entrepreneurship, but not being sure if that's the right thing for them or if it'll be too difficult.
Well, I teach entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. And one of the great things about America is our spirit of entrepreneurship. This really is the place where you can, start a business. This is my family's heritage, coming as immigrants, being able to build businesses, that change the whole life of our family. We call this the American Dream, and that's one of the reasons why I call my book Fintech, Small Business in the American Dream, because if we have more entrepreneurship and more successful businesses with access to capital, they'll be able to grow and flourish, and we create access and opportunity. I am delighted to see more attention to and excitement for entrepreneurship across the world. and more of this entrepreneurial mindset. I think it is something that needs nurturing, because in many countries, and I've been told this is true in the UK, failure is a very negative mark to have on you. Whereas in the US, the entrepreneurs think, well, of course, maybe I'll fail in my first business or my second business, but then, and all the famous entrepreneurs did, but then the third business, then I'll be successful. And this ability to, fail well is something that goes along with entrepreneurship. It's a risky activity. But the more we get this spirit, the more we get, the Schumpeter creative destruction, we have more innovation, we have more activity, we have more economic opportunity. That's a good thing.
And you're speaking to us during a visit to London. I'm just wondering, finally, whether while you've been in London and in the UK, you've visited any small businesses that stand out to you, or is there anything that you find unique about UK small businesses?
Well, I love UK small businesses, and in fact, we were introduced to one this morning, which was a great coffee place called Redemption Roasters, and they hire all formerly incarcerated people who they train inside the prisons and then give jobs to a number of them as they come out. And the place is always packed and has great coffee. So you see entrepreneurs with a purpose. And they have good products and services, they have good success, and they create access and opportunity and jobs. So I've been very impressed with them. I've also spent time in northern part of the UK with sets of businesses that are more in the supply chain, or they're more in the HVAC or services. And there's also a robust group of UK small businesses. So I think there is great opportunity for this small business sector in the UK to be even more a part of the growth economy. And that I know is a focus of government policy, and I think it would be of benefit to really reach down to those UK entrepreneurs and give them the tools that they need to grow and succeed.
Absolutely. Now, on that note, Karen Mills, it's been an absolute pleasure. The second edition of your book is out now, Fintech, Small Business and the American Dream. Thank you so much for coming in.
I have a copy for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I enjoy reading that, and I'm sure it's available online and in good bookshops, and you can look up the name of it, Fintech, Small Business and the American Dream by Karen Mills. Karen, thanks so much for coming in. Love talking to you. Really interesting to hear from your perspective, hear a US perspective as well on small businesses. And also thank you for listening to this podcast from FSB.